Call to order the meeting of the Arlington Finance Committee. First order of business is the minutes. Do I have any revisions to the minutes sent out electronically? Brian?
I just have a question. I'm not sure if I have it right. There's a clause in here about if the changes exceed the contingency funds. And it says the plans will be modified or non-exempt funds will be sought. I don't think the committee itself actually, correct me, if it said that they really wanted to seek additional funds. It's my understanding that they said they're going to stay in that budget regardless. That's why I thought it is.
Okay.
How would you like it to read?
I'm sorry?
How should it read?
I just don't, I think that they said they would modify their budget, so you just remove the clause that said, or non-exempt funds would be sought. I mean, that's a remedy if they choose to, but I got from what they said that they really did plan.
They said they would reduce scope.
Yeah.
I'll cross that out.
Okay, so cross off, or non-exempt funds will be sought. Okay, any other changes, Brian?
Yeah, I don't think they said that there was going to be AC in the building. And there's a clause here that says the AC will not be able to, I think they just said, was it treated air?
Conditioned
Conditioned,
air, not air
that's it.
conditioned, it's conditioned air. Different.
Well, no, the reason I say that is when I was in Hamilton, people were up in arms that the school was going to be air conditioned, so.
Fair enough, good point.
Okay, so how should it read?
Conditioned air.
Okay, so they should have to spell that out.
Just trying
Because if
to
you see
see.
CA, nobody's going to know what you mean.
It's a typo. I still think it's.
I'm trying to scale down the project.
Yeah. Okay, other modifications. Christine?
I was just waving at Barbara. Thank you, Barbara.
Oh, any other modifications? Better be careful what you do with your hands here.
You need an auction.
Okay, I've got a couple. On number 2, Arlington High School building, third line, it says the schematic design is more cost effective than the renovation. I think if you add one word to that, the schematic rebuild design, so they know there's a difference between the renovation and a rebuilding. So the schematic rebuild, I think, would be more descriptive.
Okay.
If we go down to the number 291.4 million in the first piece, he is hoping that the MSBA will contribute 86.4 million. He explained that 4 similar nearby projects, that if they were on the same schedule as Arlington. So I would cross out that if they were on and just say modified to the same schedule. I think it's smoother. And I had a talk with the manager, and I was surprised when he said the contingency funds were 4%, but I think they're more accurate to say they're about 7%. So if you cross off 4 and put 7, actually I thought they were 10%, but
That's what I was hoping.
he was. There's several different contingencies, and if you put them all together, the construction contingency really is about 7%. Okay, any other changes? Okay, all those, do I have a motion?
Second.
Moved and seconded to accept the minutes as revised. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. Okay, now our schedule, we're not exactly the home stretch, but we ought to be there. So the next 3 days, actually the next 2 days, next week, we really need to get the budgets largely completed, or a large percentage of them. So we have nothing scheduled for the 11th. Going to call the meeting to order and hope that people will come with budgets to be done. Even if you get small budgets, get them in. So the 11th and 12th will primarily be budgets. I'll also be looking to see if we can knock off a lot of warrant articles and get those out of the way on that. The 13th LGBTQIA Rainbow Commission will be in at 7:30. The March 18th is the next week. Transportation Advisory Committee and Minuteman will be coming. The 20th school budget, that usually takes up a good chunk of the night. So again, we need to get the budgets in. Okay, at this point, let me turn the floor over to Mr. Foskett for a presentation by the Capital Planning Committee. Welcome all of you. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Al. Thank you, members of the committee, for allowing us to make a presentation here this evening. First thing I'd like to do is ask all the members of the committee to introduce themselves, as starting with Brian.
Brian Rarig, Vice Chair.
Sandy Pooler, Deputy Downs Manager.
Timur Yantar, Secretary.
Ida Cody, Comptroller.
Barbara Thornton, Citizen. Phyllis Marshall, Treasurer.
Joe Barr, citizen member.
And Christopher Moore, citizen member.
So just note here that Steve Andrew is a citizen appointee as well, and he's in Florida. and Michael Mason is the designee from the school department, and he wasn't able to make it tonight. So, an agenda, just briefly, you just met the committee members. We'll talk a little bit about the organization, and I'll run through a couple of standard slides that many of you have seen before, but some of you might find helpful. And then we'll get into the more detailed and important recommendations. So we are organized very similar to the way the Finance Committee is organized. In fact, we sort of copied the idea from the Finance Committee, where subcommittees get subject matter expertise in different departments. And you see, by the way, you have a presentation, should have a presentation, this presentation in paper, as well as the outline of the expenditures, three appendices. So these are the various departments and the members of the committee that participate in examining the capital recommendations for those departments. I think this slide speaks for itself. You all have a copy. You can read it. Major issues we're going to discuss: big expenditures tonight, the senior center, the DVW, again the Arlington High School project, and Robinson Fox libraries. In addition to dozens of there'll be other specific expenditures by department. I think again, many of you have seen this slide before, but this is the sort of the rationale for why we do and what we do our work. And basically, it's to give a sense of purpose and meeting expectations for the town executives and management, and also to optimize the capital expenditures for the town. This next slide has one important point that I'd like to emphasize, and as you'll see as we go through this, the non-exempt capital spending is adjusted by the Capital Planning Committee and recommended to the town manager, so that the budget in every given year stays within 5% of the expected revenues of the town. That's sort of our guideline. And when we have requests that exceed that guideline, those requests either have to be moved out into the future, cut entirely, or if they're important but can't be fit within the limits of the non-exempt budget, then they have to be considered as part of a debt exclusion for exempt financing. So I think I'll turn this over to Sandy to discuss the programs in progress.
So what I try to do on this slide is just to give a quick summary of some of the things that we've had benefited from in prior capital spending, and then talk a little bit about programs that are in progress. So I have an email from Mike Rodemacher to say that road projects in 2018 included resurfacing of more than 15,000 linear feet of roadway and 13,000 linear feet of sidewalk in the following streets, for those of you who are interested. Jason Street, Spring to Gray, Pleasant View Road, Hillsdale Road, Tuff Street, Foster Street, Cornell Street, Fremont Street, Patrick Street, Purcell Road, Rawson Road, University Road, Crescent Hill, Lowell Street Place, Montague Street, North Street, Reservoir Road, Westcourt Terrace, Westminster Avenue, and Westmoreland Avenue. And I hope some of you live on those streets and were able to benefit from we, on the water side, they replaced approximately 3,200 linear feet of water main, including all the required valves, hydrants, and so forth on Lennon Street, Sunset Road, and Blossom. And sewer work included Phase 10 of the town's sewer system investigation and planning program. And I would talk more about the sewer stuff, but it's really dirty work, and I don't think it's appropriate for this audience. We also took possession of a new ambulance, a new fire tower, a new fire engine, a new rescue boat and trailer. We finished the Gibbs School renovation and the Hardy School addition this last year in the Robbins Farm Park. And my favorite on the ongoing Munis project is, we've invested a lot of money in Munis. We've talked to you a lot about Munis in the past, and one of the things that we had to go through collective bargaining and other steps to get to is to get rid of paper paychecks. So now, by agreement, all town employees get their checks direct deposited to them. They don't get paychecks, and we no longer print the little advices that people would get for their paychecks, but they get an email with it, or we've instructed people how to download an app on their phone so they can see their paycheck each week on the phone. So I think it's a little thing, but it is, I think, significant in that we're moving forward and kind of getting rid of some of these old ways of doing things and coming into the 21st century. So I was very happy that through the work that Patty Sawtell and Phyllis in the Treasurer's Office and other people, including the payroll office, have done, and of course the two HR offices, we were able to get that done. Ongoing projects.
Sandy?
Yes.
Can I ask you a question? Just considering what happened up in Merrimack Valley, when they open up and do the water and sewer pipes, are usually the gas pipes in the same area?
I really have no idea.
I just wondered if that's being encouraged to replace gas pipes at the same time.
I know that there is often coordination with utilities when we open up the streets, because we want to open the streets just once.
Right.
So if there's work that the utilities or any, whether it's electric or underground electric or gas, but Dave seems to.
Just to help you answer that question, I happen to live on Sunset Road, and before they did the water main, the water lines this past spring and summer, they did the gas lines the year before. So there's all new gas lines, all new gas meters, and Sunset Road, Newland Road, Grove Street, and Mineral Road. So it appears that they're doing it hand in hand.
Yeah, I don't know if that's always the case, but I do know often when we say we're going to do a road project, it can take a couple of years before you actually see the thing done, from start to finish, because there's so much coordination with the utilities and other things. So we're continuing to do various water and sewer improvements, and next year I'll have a list from Mike as to what they've actually gotten done. As you know, we've already talked about, we'll talk a little bit more about the high school design being submitted to the MSBA. We now have a VoIP phone system, which is a phone system that goes basically over the internet as opposed to through copper wires. We're replacing the phone system throughout the town. Eventually it will be an all VoIP system and is now in place at the Gibbs, Brackett, Hardy, and Thompson schools, and will continue to move during this year through basically all the school and town buildings. DPW design development is ongoing. It will, as you probably remember from fall town meeting, we appropriated more money to continue that development. We'll have an article in the capital plan about that, and people will talk a little bit more detail about that. The Mystic Street Bridge is another project that is continuing to move forward. They've had to ask for an extension on their grant, but they are anticipating that construction will be done by the fall of 2021. And then we are always continuing to upgrade Munis. We go in May to the latest version of Munis, which they call 2018. So even though in 2019 it's actually the latest version for us. It will give us more capacity to do neat things on our desktops. In addition to that, we are on the verge of, in this coming year, we anticipate moving forward and converting the water and sewer billing into Munis. And so we will, that'll be the last major part of all of our tax billing and so forth to be integrated into a single system. And we can then unplug the old ICS system and have it go away. Charlie?
Hang on. There we go.
There you go.
Don't skip the money.
Yeah, I know, I just got a little nervous.
Okay. So what we're trying to do is get to a number that is 5% of the budget that we're going to spend on capital. But then the first question is, what is eligible to be considered in that 5%? Because we're not taking 5% of everything that's in the budget. So the first thing we have to do is subtract out three major categories that are sort of standalone. So we go to the long-range plan and we take the amount that's in the budget for each of the 5 years of the plan. And then the first thing that gets reduced from that is the $5.5 million that's in the plan every year that is part of the general fund subsidizing the water and sewer rates. Because you can't, since that's going directly to the water and sewer fund to subsidize those rates, you can't take 5% of that in the capital plan. The second thing is exempt debt service. So within this top line is the amount, the total amount that we are paying in debt service that has been exempted by a Prop 2.5 override. But again, you can't take 5% of that because you can only exempt the amount that is exactly matching what we're paying. And then there is a debt service that comes from the enterprise funds. So that, again, is money that is meant for the enterprise funds. It does pay directly for capital in its own way, but you can't then double count that and take 5% of that for general fund. So then you get down to a modified adjusted town total budget number. So you start at $168 million in FY20, and after those reductions, we're down to 155. And then
Better work on the timing here.
you know, what's the secret to comedy?
Keep trying.
So what are we spending on our capital this year? So we added together our non-exempt debt, things that we pay, the debt projects we pay for just out of the regular 5% budget that is not been excluded by Proposition 2.5. We add to that, and this is all prior debt. That had been
Debt service.
Debt service. It's debt service, the interest and principal that is accumulated from debt that has previously been issued, and then we have to. It's like our mortgage payments on things, on previous projects. Then there's just plain cash that we're spending on capital. And then we make an estimate for new debt service that we will issue. So new debt that will be issued because of authorizations that will come at this town meeting. That tends to ramp up because in the first year, we usually just have maybe 6 months of interest payments to pay, and then we start paying principal into the future. And then also with our future planning, there are times that before we do permanent debt, in other words, sell bonds, we will sell a bond anticipation note, which is giving us the cash, sort of like a bridge loan and a mortgage before you actually take out your mortgage and you're buying a house. And we've calculated, based on what we know about future debt issuance, what the interest costs for those will be. So that gets you about $10.7 million. And then we have various other sources that are not general fund monies that we can use to bring down the effective spending rate to something that is hitting that 5%. So there are a number of categories here. I'll just go through them quickly. Non-exempt bond premium. So when we sell bonds, sometimes we get what's called a premium. It's basically a way for the bond holders to buy up the coupon rate on a bond. It's sort of like the reverse of points on a mortgage. And there's a small amount left over from our previous premium, $3,000. The Rink Enterprise Fund, there is debt out that's been issued years ago for improvements to the rink. The general fund has subsidized a lot of that, about 50% of it over the years, but the actual amount of debt service that's still remaining on the rink is reduced enough so that the rink can actually handle a bigger chunk of it than it has in the past. The ambulance revolving fund, when we buy ambulances and we've issued debt for those, that gets paid out of the ambulance fund. Capital carry forwards is sometimes referred to as sweeps. So when we have projects that have been going on for years and they're closed out, they're done, and there's a balance left over because let's say we appropriated $100,000 for a truck and it only cost $95,000. There's $5,000 left over, so we sweep that, and that gets turned back. And so we had quite a lot of that. The antenna fund was set up for the antennas that we have around for cell towers. That is really dedicated by town policy to go toward certain recreation projects and recreation debt. And so that becomes a source. The urban renewal fund for debt that we issue that has to do with buildings under the jurisdiction of the redevelopment board under the urban renewal fund. The recreation enterprise fund, again, some of their projects, that recreation fund, just like water and sewer, can pay some of the debt. Asset debt proceeds, when we eventually sell the DAV building and actually get the money in our pockets, we will spread that out to be used as a source in future years, but we have pushed that into the future because it still is kind of in negotiations. Then there are various kind of paper adjustments. When the override passed in 2011, a promise was made that a certain portion of it would go toward road reconstruction. That number increases by 2.5% every year. It's just built in so that there's money for road reconstruction. And then from years ago, when we had very big bond premiums, we kind of socked that money away and are spreading the last of it out for the next couple of years. The one thing that I want to talk about that's a little bit new, and I know I've been going over these numbers for a long time, so I'll try to wrap it up quickly, is there are projects in certain buildings that the town owns that we rent out, like the Parmenter or the Dallin School. And we take in significantly more rent than we actually have day-to-day expenses. So what we have done is we said we're going to credit to the capital plan a certain amount of that rent for the next few years to reflect the fact that we are making capital investments in those buildings and that they do provide a significant amount of revenue. So again, that's more really a paper adjustment, but it is what it effectively does will reduce to some extent the revenues that are going to the general fund generally in these years, and it will redirect it to the capital plan. You then go through all these additions and subtractions and get down to a number down here at $7.7 million. You compare that to the 155 that we had there, what an exact amount at 5% would be, and year to year you compare. So for FY20, we are pretty much exactly at 5%. We actually have $6,540 extra dollars that we could go on a spree on if
As long as a capital spree.
a capital spree. That's right. No operating sprees here. Again, a surplus in the next couple of years, a little bit of deficit in the out years, but overall, and I think this is the key that we try to hit, is overall we're within 5% over the whole plan with a slight surplus. All right, that's enough
Ready.
numbers. Thank you.
So, the next subject is the community safety expenditures. Seymour?
Sure. Okay, so I'm going to start off the discussion of the different town departments with community safety. It's on pages 11 and 12 in your handout. Just to give you some background, we met with Fire Chief Bob Jefferson and Police Captain Lee Flaherty, who is now the acting chief. And as in past years, their asks fell into three main categories. There's one time, there's ongoing, and maintenance. And so the big ask is one time. You heard about this last year, and some of the first portion of it. As a reminder, the emergency dispatch system is old. It's no longer even being supported by the equipment manufacturers. It needs replacement. And so this includes the dispatch center consoles that are actually located in the first floor of this building. That was phase one. That was a fiscal 2019 outlay of $375,000. Phase two is the rest of it, and that's the fiscal 2020 outlay. That includes radio infrastructure at this building, as well as at repeater locations. There will be one at Park Circle and one at Turkey Hill. There's also new mobile radios in all of the vehicles and new portable radios on the persons of the fire and police personnel. These appear in our capital budget that you have as two line items. Under police, you'll see radio replacement for $967,000. And under fire, you'll see portable radios. It's just for the AFD alone for $205,000. So that's a total of $1,172,000 in fiscal 2020. That's the big ask. There are only other two asks in fiscal 2020, both of which are in police, and they're both ongoing programs. Replacement here, there's an annual budget of $135,000. That pays for usually three cars, usually two marked and one unmarked cars, or perhaps instead of a car, a motorcycle. This year they're looking at replacing, they're actually phasing out their sedans, their Tauruses, and moving toward SUVs, Ford Explorers. So that's the first, or the other big ask for this year is the vehicles. There's also a bulletproof vest program. They're renewing this every year. The ask in 2020 is small because there is some money that's being swept from previous years. Actually, if you look at the capital planning for it in the out years, you'll see it's going up. That's in part because currently the vests only cover the rank and file patrolmen. There's a union issue around do the officers wear them or not. They expect it to be resolved and have the officers wear them too, so the cost will go up to $22,000 per year in the out years. Let's see, there's also, so in out years, for the police, there's just one more thing here. Mention the automatic external defibrillators to be put in all of the police sedans or police SUVs. Click over to page 12. And then fire has a few of these. I mentioned this before. This is the fiscal 2020 CapEx request for their own portable radios. But in the out years, they've got their own. Yes, sir.
Al, can we ask questions as this goes along?
Sorry?
No, it's way to the end.
Sure. Why don't you let him finish what he's doing, and then ask questions at that point.
Okay. Yeah. So then, fire has three main topics in the or spends in the out years. The big one for them is vehicle replacement, talking about big ticket items like ambulances or pumpers. They have maintenance on their stations, so thinking things like external waterproofing, flooring, HVAC. And then finally, there's the protective gear that all firefighters have to have, and that's about $25,000 per year in the out years. Dean, question for me now or for the whole thing?
I can do it now. So, I have two questions. First one is, was there any, in the police and the fire budget request,
Right.
is there any sort of public safety gear or anything like this that they requested that the capital planning committee did not fund? Or did their requests get funded?
Their requests pretty much get funded. Yeah.
They always do,
Yeah.
that's the question.
No, I mean, there was nothing in their asks for this year, or for that matter, last year, that wasn't funded.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good. Question number two, is there still a disagreement with the chief, police chief, and it's a minor disagreement, but disagreement with the police chief and the police union over when a bulletproof vest should be swapped out?
So, not the expert here, but the issue that I understood was that you can't require the officers to wear the vests currently, and
Well,
that's
I think
and because of that, they don't have that in budget for their request, and then they expect that to be resolved, and because of that, the cost will go up because they'll be having it for the entire set of officers and patrolmen, not just the patrolmen.
It used to be a secondary issue where the warranty, I think, was, let's say, 5 years. The chief was rotating them at 3 years, and the union wanted them rotated at like 2 or 1. So there was a slight disagreement on how long the vest should be in service. It wasn't a big deal.
Heard that?
Never heard.
That's not one that we've heard
We've
from
talked
them.
about it in the past.
Okay.
But, okay.
Are there any other questions on the police or fire? Alan?
In the fire, there's fire station facilities maintenance, but there's nothing in police for this facility maintenance. Just seems inconsistent.
Right. So, going forward, our hope is that there will be a lot more coordination with Steve Nestorak and his team in facilities regarding the maintenance of all town-owned buildings. And so one of the things that we do ask for is for the reps from each department, so in this case, Chief Jefferson and Captain Flaherty, to tell us what they need in terms of maintenance, but also to have had it already vetted with Steve Nestorak. And it's, each department head handles things differently.
No.
And I think that one distinctive nature of fire is that they live in that building, so they know the buildings probably more intimately than anybody else does. So they came to us with those. But we're working with Steve Nestorak's department on all of these asks. There's just nothing coming up in 2020 or that's been brought to our attention in the out years for the police department.
Tima, there's another issue here, and that is the renovation of this building is fairly recent.
Right.
Where some of the fire stations, like the Park Circle Fire Station, is probably 15 years ago. So some of the major assets have to be replaced.
Okay, I mean,
They're getting into that cycle.
Will that ultimately all be going to the facilities department at some point?
Well, I think that's really up to the town manager. But the way it looks like it's evolving, and Barbara will have something to say about this later, is that these various department heads are coordinating with the facilities department.
Okay, I was looking for consistency, and even though it's a brand new building, I'm sure there are maintenance things to keep it
Yeah, but that's,
brand new.
yeah.
So-
There's a difference between capital maintenance and maintenance.
Yeah, okay.
Okay?
I was just looking for consistency.
So you're right that it's not fully consistent. That's right. That's definitely true, and I think we're moving in that direction, though.
Okay, are there any other questions on police, public safety?
Yeah,
Any?
well, sort of staying in the facilities maintenance area in terms of this capital maintenance, just given that the furthest back renovation of the fire station is Park Circle,
Right.
and the rest of them have been more recent. And now we've renovated the public safety building here, now we're about to do some more schools. Do we know whether or not the facilities department is working on, sort of a life cycle schedule for every one of these buildings?
Can we hold
I
that
know they
question
are
till
for
later?
schools.
They are, but we'll go into that more
Okay.
detail when it's Barbara's turn. Yeah. And of course, there are always going to be surprises, even if there is a
No, I
life
know there's
cycle. Yeah.
surprises, I just
Yeah.
want to know that we're being proactive about
Yeah.
life cycle maintenance.
Are there any questions actually on the beginning of it that Sandy or Charlie covered? The 5-year plan, how it works, the numbers, any questions on those?
I got a
Annie?
question about that. Okay. So that line for roadway reconstruction from the override in 2011, is anybody reassessing whether or not we need to continue to do that?
I'm sorry?
Have you
So-
driven on some of our roads?
Yes, I do. I understand, but we're also facing another operating override and other pressing issues, and so in terms of prioritizing, do we need to continue to segregate that money going forward, since we see I at least see every operating override request as a chance to reassess our priorities. So I'm just asking if we're thinking about it.
Well, that's a sort of a philosophical discussion, probably
Yeah.
not appropriate for this meeting, would be my response.
And where did I have that discussion?
After the
then-
meeting.
Okay, Charlie, you and me.
Thank you, Timur.
All right, off to Joe's turn. Yeah.
I'm only doing one slide, so I'm not going to stand up. So it's all right. So real quick on Parks and Recreation and the rink. There's a big ask for this year, a big number for this year, as you'll see on the second bullet, for the reservoir Phase 2 improvements, mostly from the capital plan, but a big chunk coming from CPA, and Brian will talk about CPA in a minute. And then also they did get a significant state grant for this as well, but total costs were over $3 million in FY20. So that's probably the biggest element of this piece of the capital plan. In terms of multi-year efforts, they're continuing their ongoing ADA upgrades to the parks, which I think they've had some good success with, sort of discrete projects at many different parks at $50,000 a year. There's been this item for feasibility studies at $10,000 a year for many, many years, and really this reflects John Marshall's thinking prior to his departure for Belmont, is that he's moving that to the operating budget because he feels like that's really an operating expense, not a capital expense, which seems to make sense. So that's going away as of after this coming fiscal year in the plan. And then looking at other FY20, basically for park facilities, you've got some very short-term improvements at Poets Corner just to sort of clean it up, take out the existing tennis courts, which are sort of a public safety hazard, and clean that up. And then the North Union Playground next to the Thompson School is actually a $425,000 project, but they have $100,000 also from, I believe, a state earmark. And then looking at the rink itself, and I know Dean did a lot of thinking about the rink last year, but it turns out, good news, where they thought the roof over the actual rink, the bower roof, is going to need to be replaced. It only needs repairs, so there's some money in FY20 and some additional money in FY21 in the future year requests for that. The boilers turn out to need to be completely replaced because apparently at some point we put residential boilers in the rink and they're not up to the task of keeping the rink properly conditioned, I guess is the word, not air conditioned. And so those need to be replaced, so we have $150,000 for that. And then looking forward into future years, basically there's a couple of larger projects, one at Hurd Field, one at sort of a much bigger redo of Poets Corner. And then I think what John Marshall was looking to get into, which is reflected in the plan, is basically $425,000 a year for kind of to do one major playground project. And they've kind of come to the conclusion that that's about the right, based on prior experience with renovation projects of playgrounds, that $425,000 at least in current year dollars is, or at least based on what they know now, I should say, is, seems like a good number. So that sort of continues forward, but as you'll see, both in the plan document and in what Brian's gonna cover in a minute, there's kind of this assumption that a number of these projects, but maybe not, probably not all of them, and we're not really sure which ones would be funded by CPA. And so we're kind of carrying them in the plan as potential CPA projects, but with the idea, like I said, Brian will get into this, that these could wind up back in the kind of bonded or cash part of the capital plan or capital program because they don't wind up getting funded through CPA.
Any questions?
Question about long-term Parks and Rec. The Parks and Rec director is at the sort of lonely outpost at the rink, but the Parks Department, which maintains the parks, is at DPW, and I guess continued to be there. Is it the long-term plan that these would always be separate, or someplace at some point would they be together?
Sandy?
Well, different communities have different models as to whether the staff that maintains parks facilities is a standalone staff or is integrated in a town's DPW, and it's really all across the board that way. I think particularly the smaller the community, the more likely it is that the park staff is part of DPW, just so that you have a little flexibility with maneuvering staff. There has not been a push from anyone I'm aware of to change that setup, so I would say going forward, it's likely to stay the way it is.
I wasn't thinking, I understand that, you know, I know in Framingham they have separate maintenance staff for parks and community. I was thinking more about co-location of two separate departments.
Well, we're about to invest a lot of money into DPW and into a facility where those staff people are going to work from. And so I think part of that planning is to give all those staff members a decent headquarters. And then I think if you consider that most of the time they are out and about in various places other than the Parks and Rec headquarters at the rink, they're all over town. So again, I haven't heard a request from either DPW or the Parks Department to change that. So just my best guess about what's going to happen is it's probably not likely to change.
And those offices at the rink need to be, I mean, to me they look kind of run down, but maybe they're acceptable.
The offices, yeah, they are a little run down. And I don't know that there's really space to move the laborers, the laborers unions into that space. So the administrative people will stay at the rink, and the laborers will continue to work out of the DPW facilities.
Part of the roof repairs are repairing the flat roof over that area, so that should help somewhat.
Thank you, Sandy. So the next is...
Christine, you have a question?
Oh, I'm sorry, Christine.
The boilers that we're replacing, how old are they? And how
No, thanks.
that we purchased residential boilers?
I don't remember the exact number, but I believe they're less than 10 years old. It was unclear. John didn't really know what had occurred. I think at some point the wrong equipment was specified and installed, and now he's realized he had someone come in and look at them and basically said these are not up to the task of what they need to do for the rink. So I don't know the history of why the wrong equipment was put in, but he seemed pretty confident he was speccing the right stuff this time around.
Okay, thank you, Joe. The next is Brian's going to talk about the community preservation. We've had a presentation on the community preservation from the Community Preservation Committee, but I'd just like to note here, is before Brian gets started, is that we do fairly closely coordinate with them, and Brian is our liaison. Brian.
Thanks, Charlie, and that's why we're raising it tonight, is to make you aware that we are coordinating with the CPA committee. The CPA, as you know, can fund certain things. It can fund some things that we can't fund. For example, last year there was a project with Old Schwab Mill that is not a town-owned property. The conventional capital plan would not be able to fund such a thing. But there is a great deal of overlap between what is CPA eligible and what are traditional programs funded by the capital plan that are vetted by town staff and recommended by town staff to capital planning. And what we're doing with the CPA committee is trying to coordinate on those projects to optimize the funding. In general, when CPA was adopted by the voters, I think one of the promises that was made was that to some extent it would help relieve the conventional capital plan. And it's doing that to an extent by funding, particularly by funding parks projects, parks renovations. It's also doing other things that wouldn't otherwise be accomplished. But in some cases, what we're able to do with CPA and the capital plan is the poster child really is the reservoir project, which Joe just mentioned, where starting last year, the funding for that project, which is a multi-year project, has been a combination of CPA funding from the capital plan, some of it bonded, some of it in cash, and a potential state grant, which I think is still in the application process, but we're including it in the vote because it has to be appropriated before it can be received from the state. So that's sort of the classic example of why it's important that we coordinate with CPA, which we do regularly through their whole process. And with those things that are CPA eligible, hope that the CPA committee is able to fund them, and if not, that we can then consider them as part of the capital plan.
Thank you, Brian. So, we've had a couple of questions on facilities, and many of you may recall that Barbara has been instrumental in guiding the town in the organization of the new facilities department, working with the Board of Selectmen's Facilities Committee that was organized about 5 years ago. So Barbara, maybe you can address what's on the slide, but also some of the questions that were raised.
Yeah, I can indeed. I think that traditionally we've all sat down, but I'm going to take advantage of standing up because there's some very small print here that I can barely read when it's blown up that I want to address your attention to. First of all, in response to the life cycle planning for the facility, well, no, let me begin at the beginning. Christine and I together, and a few other people as well, were on that first committee and set up that led to a study of the maintenance needs in the town, which led to the facilities committee, and here we are today. I think we're in year 3 of an active committee. The committee, the facilities department under Ruthie Bennett focused primarily at the start on sort of practicing techniques in the school department. And as Steve Nestorak arrived last year, he took some of the learnings of the school department and how that process of planning for facilities needs had worked, and he overlaid another project that we've had in town and kind of randomly in various departments, primarily in the library, and that's the on-site insight report. Have any of you heard of this? Dr. Allen's going, yes. The on-site insight report is what I think Steve is now referring to here. Can we slide it over a little bit, Charlie?
Oh, okay, I was trying to make that.
So I can read the, okay, well, I'll read it here. The base building assessment is what is the new term he's using for what was the on-site insight report. That's basically coming in and periodically, whether it's maybe, let's say every 5 years, 5 or 6 years, some expert comes in, probably outsourced, on-site insight always was, and they come in and they do a survey of the department of all of the capital facilities, the roofs, the boilers, everything in that facility. How old is it? When is it due to expire? Is it ahead of, has it got a longer life or a shorter life? And that really helped the librarian for years using that report make her capital requests. So her capital requests automatically fell out of, she'd just go through and say, oh, it's time for a new boiler. It says here in the on-site insight, it's going to expire, it's going to blow up, and we're not going to wait for that, so we're going to get a new one. We're going to put it in capital for 3 years out because that's when it's due. Excellent process. Steve is planning to roll that process out with various departments. He's working now with the library. He's working with, let's see, the other departments. He's done it with, he's doing it with Town Hall. He's working with the schools department to do this, and specifically with the Hardy, and he's working with the Central School Planning Development Budget to do an aspect of that. You'll see here is a spreadsheet, and I'll let you struggle to read all the little print on your side here. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them. But what you see here is a spreadsheet that he's going to, as I understand it, sit down with the department heads. He's started sitting down with them now, but he will sit down with them between now and hopefully, as Timur said, we are expecting that we will get much richer information from our department heads when we go back and meet with them on capital planning next September. That they will have already sat with the facilities department. They will have looked at what their prior needs are back a couple of years. How much money do they have left over? Some of them weren't really aware that they still had unspent money, how much that money was, and can it be applied to new projects. How much is being spent currently, and is that spending on target? And then how much is going to be how much is going to be spent going forward in FY 20, 21, 22, etc. For the future years. So they're going to look at prior year, they're going to look at current year, and they're going to look at the planning year for the next year, and then they're going to roll forward their needs based on presumably their base building assessment reports for their main facilities assets. And that's going to be with, I'm guessing, maybe 3 or 4 more departments this coming year. I know some of, like Timur, was probably going to nudge Steve to get over there and meet with police and fire. And I think they're interested in doing that. I know the fire people are. So that's the plan. Any questions?
Annie?
Okay, so I think I wasn't being very articulate about my question before. The reason I'm asking the question is because I know this is in the works, but then in discussing the capital maintenance needs of the fire department, the implication was that, there's some big coordination going on. Do we not have a policy that we're trying to enforce that says that these kinds of capital maintenance projects have to go through the facilities department in some way, similar to the policy we have that says that software has to go through the IT committee? Am I?
Sandy?
Yes, we, for the last 2 years, in August, we sent out a memo to all the departments, and we discussed it at the department heads meeting in July, to say that if you have a capital project, similar to the way that departments have to meet with ITAC about their IT projects, that people are supposed to sit down with, originally it was with Ruthie Bennett, now it's with Steve Nesterek. And so that has been happening. So that's why, for example, at the fire department, where there was an issue about, I think, the air handlers that eventually, in I think 2024, I think they're on the list. That is because Steve and the chief sat down together and based on Steve's evaluation, gave the chief feedback. There's, I think, an ongoing issue, that discussion we've had in capital planning about how we report some of these projects to you and to town meeting, whether they should be seen as coming from the fire department in that instance or from the facilities department. I think we've sort of stuck with the idea that when we're doing work on a fire department building, that we show it as a fire request, even though it is now being vetted by the facilities department. So I don't want to confuse the discussion by implying that fire is just doing this on its own.
Yeah, I just wanted to be sure that we actually had a firm policy, not a persuasion, but an expectation.
Well, as I said, it went under my signature for the last 2 years in a row, so I hope people pay attention to what I say.
I think it's in the paper forms, right?
Yes.
Yeah, it's in the forms that the departments have to fill out. Any other questions? Yes.
Yeah, related to that and the boilers issue at the rink. I thought you said that it was 10 years ago they put the wrong one in, but that John had spec'd the right one this time around. And since his training, I guess, wouldn't necessarily be boilers, maybe it would be facilities department who would know that. I just wanted to clarify that the facilities department thought it was the right boiler in addition to John Marshall.
He has not, from my understanding, he's going from, he's started with schools, went over to the library, town hall, and he's working his way around based on, you know, his time and efforts, because he's doing other things too. He's working on OPM type things, but I don't know. And I don't know that there's any firm stamp that requires his signature on that approval, but we're moving in that direction.
So I would just say I would feel more comfortable if, given that 10 years ago the wrong boiler was specified by someone who possibly wasn't qualified, that maybe we have someone who's qualified to confirm it's $150,000.
Well, I mean, he is, I mean, I can't speak to the specific person he brought in. He had brought in, you know, an HVAC expert to consult on this, and I think it was, you know, there's clearly sort of a transition process going on as people are both able to and, you know, required to take advantage of Steve's services. But again, I think in that this was a very specific instance.
Sandy?
There is I think Steve, I know Steve talked to John about these issues because I just was privy to some of the conversations. As Barbara has laid out, Steve is doing a kind of more formal process of setting up these grids and so forth, and I don't think he's gotten that far to incorporate the rink into this formal process, but I do know that when it comes to specific projects that the department heads have reached out to Steve and he has given them some feedback. So I think there's kind of two things going on at once. We're taking advantage of his expertise, and he's building the sort of structure that Barbara's referring to in a more formal way and expanding that out to other departments. They're not all there yet within that formal structure.
So he's sort of operating as a consultant, and I know he has talked to the, on a number of things, he's talked to the Parks and Rec guy, but it's becoming more formal as we've moved just through our season in capital planning. I've seen it become more formal.
Can I just add a point to that? A point of reassurance, maybe. In our debate in the committee this year, any facilities-related capital request, a replacement of a component of a building, the first question that the committee has asked has been, did facilities look at this? Did you ask Steve for his advice? As has just been said, we're in a transition, clearly. We're still at the point where we have to ask, did you talk to Steve? And we make sure that the answer is yes. We're trying to get to the point where we can assume that this is coming through Steve.
Steve has been here since, what, March? So.
Good. Well, any other questions on facilities? Barbara, thanks very much.
Thank you.
Oh, library.
I will take the library.
Ida.
Yeah. Well, hello everyone. Thank you so much for having me here tonight. I'm very excited to share the information that I have on the library projects with you. I will try to be very brief because these two projects will not have a direct impact on the current year capital plans, but definitely we will see the impact in the out years and most importantly beyond 2024. As you probably know, the trustees and the director of libraries are proposing now major renovations and additions to the Robbins Library and also a brand new construction for the Fox Library. These two projects will amount to approximately $19 million. I saw your face. You're surprised. This committee has decided to push the design phase, the design plans to 2022 for Robbins Library and for 2024 for Fox Library. We had several interviews with director of the libraries, Andrea Nicolai, and both Barbara and I were surprised to learn that although we're in a digital era and the information is freely available online, the increase of the use of the libraries has increased tremendously over the past couple of years. I personally thought that the internet will put the libraries out of business, but clearly I was wrong, because what they did, they just redesigned their operations, they reinvented themselves, and they bought adequate equipment to continue to serve the population of Arlington. In addition to this increase of the library use, the director reported to us that there are major code compliance issues, and these renovations will help bring the buildings up to code. So why do we need these two major projects? We need them because the teen use libraries, if you want to go back.
Sorry.
One slide.
One more.
Back?
One more.
Yeah, one more.
Yeah.
Yeah. So why do we need this project? It's because the statistics show that the teen use at Robbins Library increased over 41% over the past 2 years. The director also reported that they found teens in every corner of the library, including under the staircase.
What were they doing?
What teens do.
I'm private. Just study.
What teens do.
Also, the new opening the Gibbs, the new school, created an influx of Gibbs students at the Fox Library, and again, there is no dedicated spaces for these kids. The overall use of the conference and study rooms has increased 80% in the past decade. And in addition to the 80+ boards and commissions that we have in town, which are competing for space, we also have, and I just had a conversation with Andrea, there is a community building movement. There are parent groups, there are support groups that because of this very reason that we are in a digital era, they're looking for ways to socialize, and they're always looking for rooms to use at the libraries. Now you can. All right, so the trustees and the director are proposing some renovations and expansions of the Robbins Library. We grabbed two pictures, the before and after. As you can see, the after looks quite futuristic with all those windows. The total cost of the Robbins is going to be, it is estimated to be $11,270,000, broken out into the design plans of $980, OPM $490, and hard costs $9.8 million. As I said in the beginning, this committee decided to push the original request to 2022 and to start the design plans in 2022 and continue with the construction beyond 2024. Just to give you a brief background in case you're not familiar, in 2015, the trustees and the director recognized the need of a space study. So in 2017, they engaged, I don't know how to pronounce it, I'm going to say AB Architects, and also the community. They conducted 2 public meetings. They had surveys which generated 500 responses and 5 working groups. And finally, in 2018, this AB Architects issued a plan, and this plan was paid by the library trust funds. And we can move on to the Fox Library. This is going to be a brand new construction. The total cost is estimated to be $7,820,000, broken out by design $680, OPM $340, and hard costs $6.8 million. Again, the committee decided to push the design plans to 2024 with initial request of $680,000. I would like to note that This library will be MBLC grant eligible. Only one library can get an MBLC per community, and the library director indicated that this is going to be the candidate for the grant reimbursement. Other sources, we have Arlington Libraries Foundation, which is to be determined. We don't have an amount yet. Friends of Fox will contribute approximately $100,000 to the project, and we're looking at potentially $1.1 million from the library trust funds. And the next slide is just a summary. We've already talked about the design plans. I just want to add that these projects are in the planning stages, and the total costs are subject to change since the construction will take place in 4 or 5 years from now. Again, there's further coordination required, and especially for the Fox project.
Thank you, Edith. Any questions? Alan?
It was like the design and OPM costs are like 15%. That just seems very high. They're typically 6, 7, 10% for those. Is that looked at?
I think the design, I should know this. I should know this. I think the design cost is typically 10%, and the OPM is, I'm not sure if it's a ratio or not of the others. But that's the number that we're going with
I would agree
now.
with Barbara. 10%.
The MSBA guideline, for example, for an architect is 10%, and ours, we are contracting for at 9.5%, so just as a basic comparison.
Okay. John?
On the school project, they used a cost inflator of about 4% a year. So I think they said in today's dollars, it's $100 million, but 4% compounding. And you have these hard costs, 9.8 million Robbins, 6.8 million Fox. What inflation metric do you use? Is that today's dollars? Is that 4% compounded annually? Is that some different number?
Those are 2019 dollars.
2019 dollars. Okay, so
All those figures you have there, they're for 2019, in 2019 dollars.
okay, so when we actually get the bill in 2024, whatever, it's not going to.
It's going to be
Well,
inflated.
it's also-
No,
there's
and it's
no
subject
soft
to
costs
change.
involved either, so it could be 20 or 30% higher just on soft costs.
On
There's more design, there's more planning and design that has to be done. And in addition, there's a little note here that it has to be coordinated with the Arlington master plan. But, the master plan calls for a multiple use functionality on Mass Avenue. So, when the library director met with the capital planning committee, she basically said that the multiple part of the use statement was really out of her wheelhouse. And, that's gonna fall to the planning department or the town manager or whatever to figure out how to provide that library service in the context of the master plan for Mass Avenue. And it may turn out, one possible outcome is that whatever other uses are structured around that library, which as you notice is basically a one-floor plan for the Fox Library, those other uses may provide economic value that reduces the cost of the library. So these things have to be considered yet. But what we're trying to do is get this into the capital plan.
Your capital plan income or is inflated as it goes year to year. But your capital plan costs for the library are not. At least
That's correct.
And the costs aren't actually in the 5-year capital plan yet, other than the design.
Except for the
Just
design.
the design.
Yeah, so the actual construction costs are actually outside the 5 years. Yeah.
Grant?
I'm a great advocate. Few things are more valuable to me than libraries and the investment thereof. So I think the look that you found was the pleasant consequence the effect of the Gibbs School versus the library. I only hope that kind of continues until and upon the completion. I know there's no way of knowing, but I hope that we're not unpleasantly surprised to find completion and some other thing. But I think we have it covered. But that was basically a little pleasant surprise.
I actually spoke with Andrea earlier this morning, and she said that due to the increased enrollment, she sees more and more demand for the books, for children's books. Parents come with the kids, and they borrow a lot of books for the young kids. Also, although she noticed a decrease in the adult physical book circulation, she clearly could see the increase in the digital circulation, which offset the decrease in the actual books.
Also the facility use too, just non-book related socially. I think it's great.
I'm always intrigued. I love architects. But if you take a look at the library, the Fox Library, if you notice, and then down below, all the telephone poles have disappeared.
Exactly.
There's a new tree to the right. There's lovely people walking back and forth across it. And there's a tree in the upper left-hand corner that would have to be planted in the middle of the
Exactly right.
And we're going to hold them to that.
That's why we're using 2019 dollars. Okay, any other questions on the line? Yes, Christine.
Do we know how much money is in the library trust fund?
I'm sorry, in the library?
In the trust fund, the library trust fund?
I can get back to you with that.
Hopefully at least 1.1 million.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Edith. So,
Thank you, sir.
the next subject is our town-owned rental buildings. Sandy made an allusion to them earlier, and we discussed them in a little bit more detail.
The town owns 7 buildings that it rents out for various purposes. 3 of them are under the purview or the control of the Urban Renewal Fund through the Planning Department and the Redevelopment Board, including the Central School, about which you will hear more later, 23 Maple Street, which is the building right next door to it. And we know that the program there, their lease expires this June. They have an option to extend, but it's yet to be determined whether that is going to be extended. And the Jefferson Cutter House, which has not had a lease for many years, but the redevelopment board is working to get at least with the Chamber of Commerce and the museum there. The other buildings, the Parmenter, Dallin, Ryder, and Mount Gilboa, have been traditionally up until this year under the jurisdiction and management either of the town manager's office or more recently the planning department. But one of the things you probably have noticed if you've looked at the facilities department budget is that we're moving oversight of those buildings from planning into facilities, because it just seems much more a natural alignment. At the Parmenter, we have 2 tenants, one of which is moving out at the end of this year, the Arlington School for Children, I think it's called. Is that right?
International School.
International School for Children. Sorry. And the International School of Boston is not renewing its lease. The other tenant will continue to stay there and offer preschool programs. And it is, as you heard the other night, part of the high school project. The idea is to move the preschool program from the high school into the Parmenter after outfitting it as part of the high school project budget. The Dallin, pardon me? Temporarily. So that they're not there as construction is going on, and then it will move back into the high school. Thank you. The Dallin Library is where ACMi sits, and they've been using those studios for a number of years. There is not a lease, but we do make it available for the cable TV. Ryder Street is sort of a dilapidated old building that a landscape company rents out now. Their lease expires in a year, and then I think at that point we'll reevaluate what we will do with that building. I think that business is reevaluating whether it's time for them to retire and kind of move on. So I know there have been active discussions on that. And Mount Gilboa, which is a place I wouldn't recommend going on a stormy night because it will look very scary, has a tenant in there and a one-year lease and with a lease to extend. On the next slide, you show, so we see some of the cash flow results from these buildings. And I'll just say that every year, Amy Fidalgo has, and before her, Eve Margolis, produced a multi-page report that's delivered to the Capital Planning Committee on the status of these buildings. I know I gave a copy to Pete this year. I don't know if other people have seen it. But it is reviewed by the Capital Planning Committee to look at the status and sustainability, financial sustainability of these buildings. And that, through part of that analysis, is how we determined that as we're making certain capital investments in Dallin and Parmenter, it's appropriate, based on the cash flow, to redirect some of that cash flow to pay for the capital improvements that we have. I won't go through all these numbers, except to say that most of these do throw off a pretty considerable profit, even if you consider the debt that is associated with them in the top set of numbers or without the debt below. The one exception has been the Urban Renewal Fund. It is, I think, on a sustainable level for the next few years, but in the long run, I think it will be necessary to look at that and kind of the appropriateness of that structure, because we sort of have fewer and fewer paying tenants at these buildings, and we still have ongoing capital needs, as you're about to find out about with the central school. So I'm happy to answer questions, but instead of going through all these numbers, I'll open it up.
Brett?
Is the residence, Mount Gilboa, is that a residence?
Yeah.
Residence?
Yeah, so it's put out to bid, and people bid on it, and they get to live there.
As a residence?
As a residence.
We tried to get the town manager to be the official town manager's place, but I don't think he wanted
Like
it.
the White House?
It looks,
Like a White House,
it really
right?
does look too scary. It's kind of up on the hill.
Going to be rented out for ghost tours or anything? on
That could be an excellent way.
These kids would love it.
The urban renewal fund is the central school, right?
Primarily, yeah, that's the biggest.
And it's becoming negative cash flow because it has more town staff in it. So it's almost equivalent to saying that town hall uses money, right?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things we've done in the health department and the senior budgets is we've included a line essentially for those departments to pay rent to the Urban Renewal Fund to try to keep the fund at least solvent. And so you'll see that that's been in the operating budgets now for a couple of years, I think. In the long run, it is a question of, that was, I think, originally set up to be self-sustaining financially under the, for the creation of the Urban Renewal Fund and the redevelopment board. At some point, I think it's worth examining whether that is still a viable and useful way to think about that building. But I will leave that for down the road.
No, that's where I was going. So it's a question of thinking about the fund, not thinking about the building. Just so we're all clear. The building's fine, it's just a bunch of town staff in there.
That is correct.
Well, ultimately, the urban renewal, the town is the underwriter of of any enterprise fund, urban renewal fund or not. The town is the underwriter. So if the expenses exceed the revenues, the town has to pick it up. Doesn't matter whatever we put in the capital plan.
Oh, yeah,
That's the
no, I
situation.
totally agree, but it would be the equivalent of putting town hall in a fund and saying town hall's losing money.
Right.
Let's do something about it.
Well,
Once you have
they're not-
general fund, once you start putting general fund employee services in a building, it's gonna lose money. Schools lose money by the same argument.
Yeah, I mean, this is a policy decision that the Board of Selectmen have to make.
Yeah.
Right now, it is a legal entity that exists. Any other questions on the town buildings? Okay. So the next subject is the central school, or the senior center. There's a picture of it there from somewhere back in the early 1900s. The building was constructed in 1894. It originally was Arlington High School, and then it became a junior high. And then the Central Elementary School in the late 1970s. I think my daughter was in the last class to be in the 6th grade in that school. In the urban renewal was created around 1979 or 1980, and the Board of Selectmen wanted to create some commercial activity there, as well as devote a major segment of it to be reserved for senior center and other town uses. So the last major renovation has been in the late 1970s, early 1980s, and this last year, or within the last 2 years, the Arlington Center of the Arts moved in onto the 3rd floor, and with mostly private money, they undertook a major renovation of that floor and are now providing services to the community. So we have to consider what the senior center is going to be like going forward. So the planning department has made a proposal. It's actually 3 projects in one. First of all, they have a number of, as these tenants move out, which we've just been discussing, some of the health and human services, or most of the health and human services functions are going to be moving into this building. Retirement board and some other town offices will be there, and then we'll continue to offer services for seniors. So the first one part of this project is just general program improvements. Like all of the older buildings, there are many issues of safety codes. These safety codes, including the ADA, have all been developed since the building was last renovated. So there are issues with respect to fire and plumbing and mechanical, electrical, etc. And then infrastructure upgrades that are not specifically devoted to the first 2 floors, which the planning department is focused on in this project, but there are things like the roof, the windows, etc., which are shared by all the activities in the building. So we had, in the prior capital plans, about $3 million of let's call it infrastructure replacements that were building wide, or mostly building wide. You see them listed on the right-hand side of this slide. When the 2 years ago, when the planning department first came forward with this recommendation, it might have been 3 years ago, we made a determination that the best way to treat this was to try to combine the requests for the infrastructure that were in the prior capital plan. These are things that, for example, came out of the or what is it, ACDC? No.
On-site insight.
On-site insight?
On-site insight.
It's a rock band.
The on-site insight report. And combine those in with the general planning that the planning department has been doing with respect to improving services in the building. So, as I point out here, it's been 35 years since the building has been addressed. They've had several studies starting in 2016, Sterling Associates, and then the architects A.M. Fogarty have been making advances in the planning stage. The price has gone up. It was previously in the $4 to $5 million range. After we inserted the capital planning items into the project, the hard costs went up. There was some overlap between what was in the capital plan and what was proposed by the architects. And then when the soft costs got added, the whole project rose to about $8 million. So that's by the way, that last line should say 8.056 million. Just notice that typo. So that's what's being proposed for the senior center. I also, you have a handout, a sheet of paper, a memo from Christine Bagiorno. And one of the issues that has been raised with respect to the senior center is one of logistics. In other words, there are a lot of services for seniors and other activities here that are provided in the building. When you renovate a building like this, you're going to have dust, at least, other things. And the question is, how do you provide all these services in the midst of a construction project and worry about the health and safety of the users? So the department has come up with basically a logistic plan where these various projects are going to be provided in other resources in the town, including the library, Whittemore Robbins House, the town hall, etc. And that's just included for your consideration. Okay, I think that's the last comment on the senior center project. Any questions? Yes, Grant.
Just a general question about how these estimates are derived, and then more specific as to when the time comes to replace, like, let's say, the boiler. Or is it put out to bid to fix it? So how do we get the estimates, and then?
Well, the estimates came from these three. If you look on slide 35, sorry, 25. They started out with a conceptual plan in 2016 with a consultant. This Norian Ciani company is an engineering firm, and they looked into the specific, HVAC and mechanical, electrical and mechanical issues in the building. Okay, and that became part of that analysis. But then after that, they went to this to the architectural firm of A. Fogarty. They did an initial plan that has been updated, and that's where we are today with the initial hard costs, the inclusion of the capital planning items, and the soft costs.
Right. Thanks. And then just follow that up. When it actually does come to replace this process, like ARC put out the bid type of thing?
Oh yeah, that's a requirement.
Okay.
That's. I don't know if the town has made a decision yet on the bid process.
Whether it be a construction manager at risk or design bid build, probably design bid build, just because it's a smaller project and the kind of companies will be interested in that scope would be more of a regular construction company. So architects will go through design as thorough documents as possible, put those out to bid. We take the low bidder, and then they will tell us the things we missed and ask for more money. So,
and just for clarity, once the town meeting approves this project,
that's true.
The project moves to the permanent town building committee, and the permanent town building committee, like with almost all of the other projects except the MSPA, which is sort of a pseudo permanent town building committee, goes through this process of bids and managing the architects and managing the construction firms, etc.
Right. I guess the other side of that question is, does the town ever get involved, town expertise ever get involved in, let's say, replacing a boiler or doing any of these capital plans, or do they always put out?
You mean, do we have in-house maintenance staff that does it? I don't think so. No, I think
there are two HVAC technicians within the facilities department, and so those can come into play in a couple of ways. If it's allowed, and it really depends on the circumstances of the project, that you can say, we want a particular kind of equipment because we know how to run that kind of equipment, then you can put that into the bid. We're doing that, for example, in the high school, saying that because we have integrated energy management systems that go across multiple buildings, there's certain type of equipment that need to be able to talk to each other. So sometimes you can specify that, sometimes you can't, but you would then, when you're putting together the specifications for what you want in terms of what the machinery is capable of doing, the department will have some input, the facilities department will have input into, we know how to run these kind of things, and you know, or this is beyond our capacity, so don't try to buy that sort of thing, et cetera. I think that is one of the advantages of having now this facilities department and having staffers who have expertise in maintaining this equipment.
Thank you.
What year is this work be done? When would this work be done? I missed that.
Well, it should, if it's voted at this town meeting, that's up to the town manager and the permanent town building committee, but it would probably start, I would expect, in calendar year 2019. But that's, you know, it has to go out to bid. You've got to go through the bid process. That normally takes 6 or 8 months. So physically, it probably would be in 2020. Okay.
Is there just one
Yes.
question? Did we ever replace or repair the brick entrance on the first floor?
Somewhat.
Yes,
Still
that's,
brick.
yes.
Are gone.
Yeah.
Oh, are they gone?
Yeah.
Are they now
Yeah,
pavers?
yes.
Pavers?
Something.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, that happened.
Okay.
Okay, Chris, DPW project. By the way, that we're just sort of working you up. That was an $8 million project. Now Chris is going to give you the hard news.
All right. The DPW project is the main thing we'll focus on from DPW. They're doing their usual planned replacement of various rolling stock and interesting trucks and trains and other things. But the really unusual thing that's happening, and the important thing here in terms of the fiscal plan, is the replacement of, well, the rehabilitation of the DPW facility. A lot of these buildings are dated from the early 1900s. The last significant work done there was in the 1970s, with the exception of some small interior renovations in Building B, which I think were the 2009 or so. And the facilities are not really serving the needs of the town very well anymore. There's a sort of list of problems on the slide, ranging from, you know, spaces that really aren't adequate to the tasks that are trying to be performed in them, poor ventilation, lighting, regular flooding, which is probably not the actual problem, it's irregular flooding that's the issue, but it happens frequently. And then also insufficient space to store the expensive vehicles that they own to perform maintenance work in the town. And these all combine to have a significant impact on their ability to get their jobs done. Yeah.
How are they going to mitigate the flooding?
Mostly by moving to high ground.
I'm sorry?
Mostly by trying to move away from where the flooding is most significant. I'll show you that in the plan in a couple slides. It's tough though, because Millbrook goes right through.
Yeah, right.
It's what they call a difficult site. So in the next slide, this is just an example of the current state of the buildings. You can see that these buildings are in significant need of repair. And that's part of this project, is to repair these buildings and put them to some new uses. And then also to build some new buildings on the same site. So if you go to the next slide.
Yeah, just if I could make one comment,
Yeah.
Chris, you know, the capital planning committee toured the building. We went through all of the rooms, all of the roofs, the paint shop, you know, I mean, it really needs work.
Yeah. So this is a schematic layout that can give you kind of a general idea of what's being proposed. The building you're probably used to that fronts on Grove Street is this one right here. Millbrook goes through the site right here. And these are the old buildings that are currently on the site. This is currently parking. And what they're proposing to do is to build this new structure here and move most of the processes, the shops, the offices into this space. And then renovate these buildings for different uses. One of them is the IT department, and the other is facilities. So those spaces will go to that. And then to use these spaces over here, which flood frequently, for uses that you can kind of survive the flooding. So storage of large trucks, for instance. You know, if a foot of water gets in there, you don't really care. Those trucks drive through a foot of water. It's not a problem. This is also covered vehicle storage that's new. And then the other complication that's not shown on this diagram is the high school sitting over here, of course. And the current plan is to have a connection from the high school over to Grove Street that comes through here, so this salt shed's gonna have to move. They're still working out kind of how that's gonna go. But the idea is to you know, the flooding problems are worst over here, to move the critical functions of the DPW onto the places that don't flood, at least not as frequently. Any questions about that? Yeah.
Where is the fuel depot?
The fuel depot, I think is here, but I'm not yet. Is that right? Yeah. So it also has to move, right?
That's as of this plan.
Yeah.
This will not be the final plan.
Yeah, things will have to move around as they make room for the Grove Street connection to the high school. Yeah.
So, not a direct DPW question, but relating to this, we already talked about rec, so I figured we'd come out. So, in addition to having these like tons of kids that are showing up to the schools that put stress in the buildings, they put stress on the playing fields. They cause them to be these big dirt balls because they're just running on them nonstop. So this plan in conjunction with the school department takes away field.
Right.
They're just gone. And I know that the town manager had said in the fall that he was looking at alternatives to replace that space, or have other usable space and things like that. And obviously that would be funded through the capital budget. And here we are at the capital budget. So was there any discussion subsequent to that at the capital planning committee about what's going to go on with those playing fields or alternate spaces or not?
Sandy, you want to take that?
So there is actually a net increase in playable fields under the high school plan because as we've moved the building up, you'll see this when we get to, actually we don't have a site plan, but I think it was part of the presentation on Monday. But behind the high school right now is you know, there's the football stadium, that's a turf field. There's the west, right now there's a baseball field, and I think there's the east, there's a softball field. Those two will be switched, so you'll have a varsity baseball field on the east side that you can play regulation games, and the softball will be moved to the other side. They will both be turf fields, and on those turf fields will be practice fields that will then make up for the loss of the so-called Pierce field that's behind Stop and Shop. So you lose one field there, but you're gaining two practice fields plus two varsity competition fields in the new area. So it should be a net increase of one field in that area. In the meantime, there's still discussions going on. Leslie College is looking at, you know, and has talked about maybe putting money into a field in town for its use to be shared with the town and so forth. Those discussions are ongoing. So yes, we're still looking at other things too.
Sure. Two follow-up comments is, so on a macro level, yes, probably a net increase in field space. The challenge is town, this is something obviously people involved in government understand better than the average citizen. So it's the removal of town field space, the addition of school field space. So instead of like the youth soccer program or the youth lacrosse program being able to go to the town and get a rec club and get a permit, they now have to beg an athletic director who at times is very combative towards these youth soccer programs. I'm just going to say it, because then I should say as a member of the soccer club board, you have an athletic director who's extremely combative to giving up any space. And it's like, oh, you don't need space, our space. So it's really not a net. It's not a net increase. It's taken away from the town, and it's given to the schools, and then it's going to then the user groups, and then the schools are going to put their onerous fees on it and all sorts of crap like that, which they like to do on the users. It doesn't quite go net. And then my second thing is, how are they going to pay for that turf?
It's part of the $191 million budget.
Okay.
And I guess I'm sure there are those issues. Having tried to run a soccer team myself years ago and finding field space, I can appreciate the pain that sometimes people go through. I will say at the high school building committee, one of the points that was made repeatedly is that because these are going to be turf fields and they can be used much farther into seasons than the mud field that's at Pierce now, There's going to be there's just going to be more days of usable field space there, which I can't speak to the territoriality of certain people over their fields, but I can say that it will ease the crunch in the sense that the resources will be expanded. So there'll be more space to play on more days of the year, and maybe that will help. And I think, again, certainly within the committee, there's an expectation that these will be opened up for community use.
Annie?
Yeah, just want to add a quick comment to that, which is that, I believe the field at Spy Pond is a town field, yes? Where we have and the freshman soccer team has traditionally played there. Will they be able to play on these practice fields now instead?
Yes, I can't speak to the specifics of how they schedule boys, girls, soccer, lacrosse.
I'm just thinking
yada,
whether
yada,
they're
yada.
regulation playable fields or whether they're just practice fields.
I believe they will be able to play regulation games, but that's subject to
There might be
confirmation.
some shifting. I'm just saying, never mind, we'll talk about it after.
Any other, yes, John?
At one point, I thought that there was going to be some land acquisition, when people were talking about the controller. Is there land acquisition as part of this or not?
There is a question of if a road goes through from the high school, it is possible that one way to do that is to acquire the parcel that's right at the corner of the DPW parking lot. And that's, in fact, maybe where the fueling facility would go, because it would have the greatest access to the street and for vehicles coming in and out. That is a design possibility, but it's not been put forward as a specific plan, and DPW is still going through design at this point to determine how to, solve the various issues on the site. It did come up in a meeting at one point as a possibility.
And who would is the owner willing to sell?
It hasn't, there's been no, I'm unaware, although I wouldn't necessarily know about all of it, that there have been any decision to, A, move forward with that as a way to go, or I think reach out to the owner. It is a tenant-occupied building, not an owner-occupied building. And what we would try to do, obviously, would be reach out to a friendly taking or purchase, if that is the direction they go in.
So I think we're wandering a little bit from the subject here. So,
Sorry. Can I ask one more question? Is IT, is that the GIS department too, or no? It's not how GIS department is at Town Hall Annex. Is the GIS department going to be here?
No, that staffer, Adam Krowski, will stay in the planning department.
Chris, you want to
All
talk
right.
about the finances?
So yes, the next thing is how we pay for it. So in FY17, the capital plan funded $1 million roughly for planning. In FY19, at the December 2018 special town meeting, the water sewer fund funded another 1.2 million. So that's 2.3 million that we're expending on planning. And then the request this year for fiscal 2020 is 29.9 million, which is split between the water sewer fund and the capital plan. And the idea basically is that the water sewer fund is going to cover that fraction of the cost that corresponds to the water sewer uses that exist in that building. And that the way that's currently divvied up is 72% to the plan and 28% to water sewer, which is in line with the sort of roughly a third number that's been getting the plan for quite a while now. So the capital plan portion of this is planned as a 30-year bond. The thing that's a little different than normal is that it's level payment that we're planning. That makes it easier for the plan to sustain the cost of this as a non-exempt bond. So it doesn't age out and roll off quite as fast as a typical bond does for us, which is usually level premium. The water and sewer component will be appropriated as a bond issue, but the water sewer fund has a fairly large surplus, as I understand it, so some component of that will probably end up being paid out of cash. And if approved, the construction would begin this summer.
Yes. I have to say, I'm still worried about the flooding. I mean, that is a hollow, that whole region in there is a big hollow. And it seems to me that
if we're gonna spend $32 million plus dollars, that building ought to be elevated to some extent, maybe 10 feet higher than where it is right now. Given what we already know and the fact that, like it or not, global warming is gonna create a whole lot more flooding in areas like that. So, is there some way, Sandy, that you can get that opinion placed in the planning or something like that?
I'm aware, I don't know the details, John, that there are some flood mitigation matters that they're going to undertake as part of the project. In terms of the building, the big kind of barn-like building that there, unfortunately, or for better or for worse, it's designated as a historic building. So, frankly, it would be better just to tear the damn thing down and build a whole new building. But that's not really an option.
But the new building is gonna be away from there, right?
The new building will be, and
Right.
it'll be up higher. But in terms of the areas that typically flood, it's in that old historic building. And there's, I think, again, the major problem from the flooding right now is you have shops in there. And what Mike Rademacher told me is that what really gets ruined is all the equipment that they use to repair things. It's not so much the trucks. If you're just using it as a garage, it is somewhat inconvenient maybe to have water in there. But it's not going to ruin all the equipment that periodically gets ruined from time to time now. And that's all going to be moved to higher ground.
Do you have any idea how much higher, or is it just some idea that it's higher now? Because that whole, I mean, up until you start up the hill, you know, that whole parking lot area is pretty low.
There is, Mike has talked to me about what areas regularly flood, and I think that is why Weston and Sampson, the engineers who are designing this, have discussed that with Mike, and then I'd be glad to have him follow up with specifics about that, but I know that's something they looked at in a lot of detail.
I'm gonna need to hear.
Yeah, okay.
I'll talk to Sandy.
Sandy, historic buildings, I mean, is this a declaration by the town's historic commission? Or
I
we can tear
believe
down-
it's a state designation for the big barn, and I think for the building that fronts Grove Street have both been state designated as historic.
And you can't touch them? Because even a historic house, all it does is delay it for a year.
That, I know for the town bylaw, that's a 1-year demolition delay.
Right.
With the state, I believe they're stronger, but I don't pretend to be an expert on that. I do think that they have looked at it, and if they had thought that they had some flexibility, they might have done something different, but they felt hamstrung.
I wonder, is the flooding gotten worse, like in the last 10 years? Has it always been a flooding issue? I guess what I'm thinking is, when we did the high school Pierce Field, it's all, I think, impermeable now. Water can't get through it. Whereas before, water could get through it. I wonder how much...
I think some of it has to do with the debris that comes down Mill Creek and then clogs up. There's some drains there that are meant to catch things, and more stuff has caught and then has caught. So one of the things they're looking at is how to redesign that so that the water doesn't back up because of tree limbs and other trash and detritus that come down.
Okay, thank you very much. Chris? Brian, you want to recap it?
Yes. So it's not news to you that the Finance Committee endorsed the project. The Capital Planning Committee did as well, also unanimously. And that moves the project ahead to the town meeting. And subject to town meeting appropriating the funds, which requires a 2/3 vote there, then we go to a townwide ballot for debt exclusion on June 11th. The next slide, the construction timeline, just to remind you of that, stretches out over 4 years, but the advantage of this the design that was selected is that it retains the usage of the main facilities, the large-scale facilities like Performing Arts, the auditorium, and the gymnasiums at all times. So a new auditorium is built before the old auditorium is torn down. And first occupancy will be in January of 2022 in the steam wing. How are we funding the project? And this obviously is subject to a debt exclusion. First, excuse me, the MSBA process, which will has been ongoing for 2 years, sort of climaxes on April 10th when the MSBA will meet with us and will negotiate its share of the project. And then the town will enter into an agreement with the MSBA for reimbursement. And that then goes to town meeting and the voters. Once that happens, we'll have a better idea of the town's share. We expect it to be about $205 million. The project budget, as you know, was $291.4. That actually changed slightly in a meeting with the MSBA last week. It's down by $600,000 at the moment from that number. So, how's it going to be funded?
What is down, their contribution?
No, the total project budget
Oh,
that the MSBA is agreeing is appropriate for the project is now $290.8, which I think is encouraging. That's the only change that the MSBA thought was appropriate to make in the total budget for the project. How will it be funded? The borrowing obviously will be, while there's been a lot of conversations about it, it will eventually be up to the treasurer to determine. But the expectation is that because this project goes on for so long, the borrowing will be in multiple, probably annual tranches. That means that the expectation again is that this is exempt debt. We probably need to borrow about 30% of it in year one, maybe 40% in year two, and 30% in year three, something like that. Very much subject to adjustment once the project is better defined and the timeline is better defined. What we're showing here is just an illustration of how that might apply to the median single-family house, which we still estimate the projected debt service to be a peak of $800 on that median single-family house. But because the funding will be borrowed over the course of the project, that ramps up in numbers that, this is one example of how the numbers might ramp up.
Questions? Yes, John.
One of the things that the building committee emphasized to us was that we were agreeing not to a particular school but to a number. The $291 million was the number, and that couldn't be higher than that. And if it was going to be higher, use things, change things, so we didn't make it under. They also explained they have this 4% inflation thing that they use, where they say today's dollars and they multiply it by 4%. I don't know where that comes from, but 4% is a lot. If you assumed the inflation was 2%, like top line economy, there's like a difference of like $20–30 million. My assumption is that 4% number is probably state politicians requiring it to be 4% and wanting projects to become under budget. Like even this Concord thing that we talked about in the end, we're under budget. So this is back onto my question, which is that if the inflation is not 4% for the construction costs, but 2%, then there's savings of millions, tens of millions of dollars. And is that money then at the discretion of the school building committee to put back the wood paneling? to put back more geothermal things, to put back some of the things that they took out and still be under budget. Or my preference would be, can the capital planning committee be involved in figuring out the appropriate uses townwide for these savings that were savings only because the inflation level wasn't as high as we had anticipated.
Yeah. Maybe taking the treasurer mentioned.
Well, appropriating X dollars, 291 million for the high school project. So the only entity that could transfer that money from a high school project to a library, for example, is the town meeting. So that would, the high school would have to say, we're finished.
I don't think so.
Except we couldn't because it's exempt.
It's exempt, it would have to be voted.
The voters would have.
Good point.
Yeah, so.
Well, the town meeting would have to transfer any appropriation. It can't just be spent for something else.
Phyllis, what is your thought on that?
I guess I heard a different question. It seems to me that the body that would control it would be the building committee, would it not?
It is, in this
Who
case.
makes the decision about how the funds are used or turned back in terms of that project. I thought that was how it was structured, is that the school building committee, and certainly the public would be able to weigh in on that, but that's the process normally with an MSBA project from within the town, is that there is a building committee assigned to that project. And so if the cost of the project actually comes in lower because of the time frame and the scheduling being condensed so that you can borrow quicker, all of those things come into play about how much money is available to spend and how it's spent. But I think that's the point of the committee, is to make sure there's participation by the community and the parties that are going to be attending those meetings for discussion.
That's exactly right. By statute, it's the building committee. The 4%, Charlie, can I just throw one other thing out? The 4% escalation is actually a not unrealistic reflection of the construction market in the greater Boston area. It also is inflated to the midpoint of construction, not to the end point. So it's not exaggerated in that sense. It's an attempt to be realistic about what the average dollar on the project is going to have to do.
That was my comment. Any other questions? Thank you. So, Phyllis, do you want to ask us not to vote on the rescission?
Yes, I do. I would ask that we don't have any rescinding to propose to you, so we would ask that you take no action on this proposed article.
So also, Phyllis, I think the committee is going to be presenting a vote to town meeting, or a vote to the recommended to the finance committee that has a different complexity than we've seen in prior years. Perhaps you'd like to make some comments on that.
Sure. The next slide is the reappropriation of borrowed funds, and these are specifically the funds that remained in projects that were borrowed, as opposed to funded by cash. So these projects that are completed and there are funds available remaining after the completion of those projects will be have been listed here, and they will be assigned to projects that have terms that are similar or longer than the original project was borrowed for. And that's it's just one step further to map out how those funds will be used in other projects, and so that everyone's aware that the one project that was originally borrowed for has been completed, and now these remaining funds will be assigned to a project with a similar life, purpose, and borrowing.
Okay, thank you, Phyllis. So, Brian, do you want to wrap up on the 5-year plan?
Yes, so Sandy's already reviewed this calculation, which gets us from the adjusted town budget to our 5% allowance, adds other direct funding sources and adjustments, and demonstrates that we're within the 5% target. Which gets us to the recommended vote, which is the next slide, and we're asking you to endorse the plan, which is funded by these figures, cash, first direct appropriation from the general fund of the amount shown, bonding, permanent borrowing, some of which may be done as bond anticipation notes at the discretion of the treasurer. At the moment, we don't have anything built into the current plan expected to be banned or done as a bond anticipation note, but the treasurer always has the discretion to do that. And other are those items in the plan that are funded by other direct sources, which are primarily the water and sewer enterprise fund, the borrowings that are funded directly by water and sewer. And to be clear, there was an additional appropriation that was done at the December special town meeting for the DPW renovation, which Chris mentioned as part of the funding for that. That is not included in this vote. It was already voted for.
Yeah, just to add, to note, on the top portion of the chart on the right-hand side of the slide, the vote will include $4,321,873 to finance the exempt debt service, which is debt service required by prior debt exclusion votes, and is not specifically related to items that are in the capital plan directly, which are all non-exempt. Okay, any questions on this? So you have attachments, the fiscal year 2020 capital budget, the 5-year capital plan, and the forecast of the new debt service. All of these things include the impacts of the major items that we discussed with you tonight. So what we're asking the Finance Committee to do is to vote for favorable action on our recommended budget for 2020. To support the 5-year plan, that means the 5-year plan is not, other than the debt service, is not actually voted as part of the vote in front of town meeting, but your endorsement of that plan is an important factor in having town meeting support the overall program that we present to it. We also have an article in the warrant to transfer $10,000 from the perpetual care fund to the capital budget, and the treasurer, the comptroller assures us that the $10,000 is in the perpetual care fund, and support the treasurer's debt rescission article for no action. So those are the things that we would like to ask for your support on, and as always, there's a chance between now and town meeting, something's going to come up that's going to require some changes in the capital plan. If there's anything material, we would certainly come back. Thank you very much for your time tonight. We appreciate it. Dean.
So I understand the action requested. On slide 34, there was reappropriation of borrowed funds. And then, doesn't that fall under that same rescission article?
You mean on slide 34? Yes, that, actually, yes. Is that included in the vote numbers? Yeah.
It is. When the vote is completed in detail, that will be part of it. But that number is a subset of the 1.2 million of capital carry forwards that are shown in the plan for 2020. So those are the capital carry forwards being reappropriated that were previously bonded. There are also some capital carry forwards that were originally cash appropriations that go to make up the rest of the 1.2 million. And all of that will be detailed in the vote, but the 1.2 is the total.
But we will need to take a vote on that.
Yeah, I'm just trying to get my house in order for the
Yes,
minutes.
but that's going to, so what's going to happen is,
when we put together the final warrant, you know, we always come to you with the written vote, right? It's like, in the past, it's been, I think, 4 parts. It'll now be 5 parts. And those items on slide 34 will be enumerated in the vote.
Yeah, but for our own internal process, when the committee leaves and we vote, and we make a motion, we should make a motion to support the no action on the decision and support the recommended.
That would be fine.
Thank you.
Now, the Article 59, which is the rescission vote, also says a reappropriation. I mean, you could take this under that vote article.
I think it's easier just to put it all in one.
That's
article.
fine. Okay. Okay, questions? John?
We didn't have a slide on the IT budget, but I have some questions. There's this interface between Reg QA and GIS, which I think is great, but I don't see anything specific for the town's email system. When I set up my password to be here, I had to call somebody on the phone and read them my password, which seems a little antiquated and
So,
frankly, like dangerous. So I heard that there's cost associated with moving from the free platform that we use to something that costs money, and I wonder when that will be, when we'll move from 1996 to 2000.
I believe that will start happening later this year. I think what they're trying to do is finish the VoIP system first, and then they've been looking at probably going to something like an Outlook system, which would also get us onto probably like Office 365 for a lot of the software, which is then that allows us to do things like SharePoint and share files in the cloud and all those things. So that was, I think, approved a while ago. It's just been a matter of person power in the IT department to move the projects forward. But that is, I'm very glad to say, it's something that will be happening sometime, I think, by this time next year we'll be reporting on that.
And money was appropriated in the previous capital budget.
I think there's also money in the operating budget, because it then becomes not a capital acquisition, but an ongoing licensing.
Other questions? Okay, let's go through this. The prime request for them is favorable action on the budget, which is on page 18, slide 36. So that includes the cash, it includes, I'm sorry, Dean, go ahead.
Okay, when you're done.
Okay, that includes the cash, it includes the new bond authorizations, it includes the other, which is primarily from a lot of enterprise funds and other more self-supporting. It includes the prior debt service that's already been bonded. It'll include some future debt service, a small amount, that will happen next year. So that recommended vote is sort of the whole kit and caboodle of the budget on that.
And the funds that Dean mentioned that were on slide 34 are contained in the 1.25 million in the third bullet on slide 36.
Okay, questions? Dean?
So I move favorable action on the recommended vote of the Capital Planning Committee as shown on slide 36 and just illustrated by the chair. I further move favorable action on the treasurer's recommendation.
Well, why don't we take this one step at a time?
Okay.
This is the biggie. So does that have a second?
Second.
Discussion? Questions? Okay, Brian?
In general, I understand what the capital plan is. Not necessarily crazy about everything that's going on over at DPW in regards to the building. And we haven't had anything really presented on it. I have no issues with it being in the budget. I assume at some point we get to debate DPW and the building. Or is it this vote approved, de facto approving that?
I'm sorry,
I'm not crazy about, and I haven't seen, or this committee hasn't seen, or maybe I missed it when the first week when it was, or first couple weeks when it was in here. The construction of the new DPW building and everything. I know that's amorphous and it's moving. By virtue of the fact that it's in this plan and we approve it, Okay, I stand by the plan, I'm gonna vote for the plan. My question is, how does that relate to supporting the DPW and what's going on with their budget, which seems to be quite high?
With their operating budget.
No, with the capital budget for the new building, which is in this document.
So this, the plan for this building was initially presented by the Capital Planning Committee about 2 years ago. And this committee supported that, the town meeting supported it, and we allocated roughly $1 million. Then the town meeting again voted in December last year, 1.25 million.
Yes.
Additional planning funds to be transferred from the
Water
water sewer funds. Okay, so that planning is in process, and this vote takes the funds that have been projected from that planning process and asks town meeting to vote the authorization of the necessary, or to appropriate the necessary funds for that, either from cash or
For
bond.
bond.
Yes.
Okay, Annie?
No, I didn't want to touch it, just.
Okay, is there any further discussion or questions? Motion's been made for favorable action on the recommended vote as presented by the Capital Budget Committee. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Okay, favorable action, unanimous, 3-6-19. Okay, so that's the first. The next one is basically generally supporting the 5-year plan. The 5-year plan is not before town meeting, but you've heard generally the direction that the capital budget is going, and you have this. So this is, supporting the capital plan going forward. There won't be any specific vote before town meeting on that. Dean?
Move the finance committee support the 5-year plan as shown in the handout.
Second?
I second.
Oh, okay. Any discussion or questions? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Unanimous? 3-6. Okay, the transfer of $10,000 from the perpetual care fund. Last time I checked, the perpetual care fund was like $4 million plus. I think it could cover this. And there'll also be some money coming from DPW on that. So do I have a motion on that?
So moved.
Second? Moved and seconded. Anybody have any questions on this? There's two funds, the perpetual care fund and the sale of Watson Graves fund. We take money from, can't remember which one we did last year, for both DPW, which we'll hear about next week, and the capital comes from that. So it doesn't come from general funds. Motion's been made and seconded for favorable action. Any further discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Unanimous? 619. Okay, support this is Article 59, which is to rescind or reappropriate borrowing authorization from prior years. The treasurer is recommending no action. Do I have a motion?
So moved. On the treasurer, our amazing treasurer's recommendation, after she had to replace such mediocrity.
I won't even comment on that. Is there
Bring
a
it on.
second?
You got it.
It speaks for itself. Any questions? Discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Unanimous, no action on Article 59. And finally, the reappropriation.
Slide 36.
This is slide
Sorry, slide
34.
Slide 34.
Okay, so this is basically taking dollars that have been borrowed but not spent, and transferring those items to other things where they will get spent. These are leftover monies. We really need to get rid of them so they can get spent. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, motion's been made and seconded for reappropriation of borrowed funds And slide 34, any discussion or questions? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, unanimous. 3619, and I think we did everything you asked.
You did. Capital Planning Committee, thank you for your support.
Thank you. Well, I'd like to thank all you guys. I mean, you've been working on this since what, September? So, you know, our duty is fairly short compared to these guys. So, thank you very much for coming. We really appreciate it. And thank you for all your good work.
Thank you.
Okay. It's almost 10 o'clock. It's been a long night. Now, we're meeting next Monday. As I said before, we don't have any hearings or anything. We'll work on articles, we'll work on budgets. So I need to see budgets. I know you'll probably have rec and rink.
I hope so, but yep, we still have other budgets to do, and many questions to answer.
Okay, so we know those guys are going, need to get from everybody else. Any other business before the meeting? Meeting is adjourned. Thank you.